So, there is a Doctor Who episode where one of the companions climbs up to a castle using Rapunzel's hair. There's a forest of trees that are actually letters which make up phrases. And yet, people have a problem with an episode with exploding bubble wrap. Now, we're continuing on from where we left off. Last we did The Unearthly Child, which was the first story I bought from the William Hartnell era. So, let's move forward. Let's talk about the first story I bought from the Patrick Troughton era. This is not the first episode I've seen. That's a completely different story, but this was the first one I bought. Now, don't ask me what prompted me to buy this one. Maybe I just looked at the box, read the synopsis, and thought it sounded interesting, and once I tell you the synopsis, you'll kind of feel the same way. But the story in question I bought was The Mind Robber, which was written by Peter Ling. For everyone who ever says that Doctor Who has a tendency to get really silly to the point of intolerance, I can never bring myself to that point because I remember this episode. This is the episode that always has me go, wait a minute, this is the show that had this happen.
Do you submit? I submit!
Now, this episode was actually meant to be only 4 episodes long, but because of a reshuffle where some stories got lost and they still had to fill in some time slots, they forced the writer to have to write an additional episode for this one, so making it effectively a 5-parter, and a very rare 5-parter. Again, much like the Demons and much like the Dominators, there aren't very many 5-parters in the history of the classic series, but I would definitely say this is one of my favorites, principally because in a way, kind of like how Inferno had to add a whole subplot to beef it up, and it wound up benefiting the story as a whole. This is one that, because they beefed up the story, they ended up creating a very interesting, very atmospheric prologue, which does serve as a really good segue into a very fanciful story. It picks up immediately after the end of the Dominators, where the Doctor set off a volcanic eruption. Well, that is a pro because it was the solution for the end of that episode, but it does lead to the Doctor, Zoe, and Jamie running into a bit of a problem when they realize that the TARDIS is parked in the path of a wave of lava. Well, the Doctor's forced to take the TARDIS out of reality, which leads to a bit of a problem. What happens when you take anything out of reality? Is there anything that exists in a world of unreality? Is there anything living out there? Well, this episode actually explores that idea. Now, the first episode is drastically different tonally to the rest of the story because, well, obviously, they had to write an episode on the cheap, so they had to write an episode that was dominantly inside the TARDIS, but they also had to go out, and where they go out to is a world that is absolutely opaque with absolutely nothing in it. It's one of those times where you can imagine the writer was given the tools that was at his disposal. They said, you got the TARDIS interior and you've got this empty studio space. Do something with it. And he does. But the episode in question is actually very intense and very subtle. It actually plays with your sense of not knowing because they do such a good job setting up the idea in the first couple scenes where the Doctor says, outside the TARDIS right now is nothing. We're nowhere. And that's the best thing that we said, and the Doctors keep saying, don't go outside. But there's something out there that's tempting them outside, and because you don't know, and because the episode does a great job not telling you, but tickling you with all these little things that make you go, what is going on out there? You are immediately intrigued, and by the end of this episode you are game for everything that's going to transpire in the 4 episodes to come. So it is a really good kickoff episode. I think the only con to it is that when you get into the ebb and flow of what the rest of the story is, tonally it's a bit different. The first episode plays as something of a psychological thriller, even a touch of a science fiction equivalent to a haunted house movie. So following on, they end up in this forest where they discover that all the trees are actually shaped like letters, and when Jamie climbs to the top, finds out that it's a forest of phrases. They realize they're in a land of fiction, and they end up running into characters like Lemuel Gulliver, Rapunzel, they run into a superhero from a comic strip from Zoe's age. Even during the course of the climax, there's characters like Cyrano de Bergerac, Blackbeard the pirate, even though he's actually a real guy. Of course, you're thinking, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. There's no way they could pull this off and be able to maintain the show's integrity. But again, because this is a show with such a simple blueprint, and because it embraces the philosophy of being able to go anywhere and do anything, what is there saying there isn't some reality or unreality, so to speak, where you can run into fictitious characters. This is Doctor Who's equivalent to the Imagination Land trilogy, except, less rapey critters.
How about we kill them and then rape their bodies so we can use their blood as lubricant?
Say, that's a great idea, Barry Bear.
And for me, when I was starting off as a Doctor Who fan, this was definitely one of the right Troughton episodes to start with. Now, it does get a little ambitious on the production level, especially when it comes to a certain fight sequence involving Zoe fighting this superhero called the Carcass. I don't know if Wendy Padbury had a lot of experience with stunts, but bless her, she did her best. And I suppose the thing that helps you carry through on it is the fact that Christopher Robbie's performance as the Carcass, as the character's called, is so over the top, it just blends. And I think because a lot of the actors who are playing the fictitious characters are playing it very over the top, it tends to lend a lot to the credibility of the story as a whole. But it's not just silly, silly, silly all the time. There are some moments where it actually tries to be dark and atmospheric. There's a great sequence in a labyrinth where they run into the Minotaur. Now, granted, all you see of the Minotaur is just a mask, but they do a lot of trick photography and a lot of lighting tricks in order to really sell the threat of it. And, of course, the overlying idea that we're in a world that's not real, which means that as long as you acknowledge what is here is not real, then it's not real. And they play with that a lot throughout the course of the story, sometimes to dramatic effect, sometimes to really comedic effect. And because they're in a reality where anything's possible, well, there's a certain funny little incident that happens with Jamie, and this leads to another interesting aspect that happened in the production of this episode. Fraser Hines got sick during the course of filming this episode, so he was unable to continue on with filming. But fortunately, because this is a kind of episode where anything can happen, they took advantage of it and they picked up a stand-in, Hamish Wilson, to come in and take over for Fraser Hines for, I'd say about the recording block of the midpoint of episode 2 into episode 3. Hamish Wilson does a really good job standing in for Jamie, and in fact, I want to say it was either Hamish Wilson or Fraser Hines who actually thought it would have been kind of funny if they actually carried that over into maybe even the next story to come, and then at some point later on get Fraser Hines back into the seat. But I think deep down, I think Fraser was probably going like, no, you ain't taking my job. And the fact that you can just accept it just shows how well the episode's written and how the concept is developed, that they can have this little detour out of necessity. I feel that that's why I love this episode so much, because the thing I've always said about Doctor Who, and I've said it in previous reviews, and I'm going to say it now, because this is a show that is able to do pretty much anything it wants, this is the episode that is a testament to that fact. And I always tell people who are always trying to naysay, saying, no, Doctor Who can't do that, it's not allowed to do that. I was like going, they went to a world of fiction. I think it's safe to say if they can get away with doing that, they can do anything they want. And this is the episode I'm always going to trot out as the prime example of why Doctor Who is such a versatile show. And I think my only lamentation about this story is that they never followed up on it. There's like a wealth of things you could do with this idea. In fact, the big bad of the episode, who, yeah, he was called the Master, but this is before the Master was ever even known as a character, so you can get away with it. But that villain wanted to actually bleed out into reality. So I'm like, oh, wouldn't that be actually kind of funny? The idea that the unreality starts breaking out into our reality, and there ends up causing chaos all over Earth because all of a sudden fictitious characters are running rampant all over the place. What fun would that be? Oh man, Chibnall, get on this. It would be so much fun to see them take this episode and sequelize it, and they could do so many fun ideas. It could be a really funny episode, it could be a really dangerous episode. They could do so much with this, and I lament that it's just stopped there. But you know what? It's the credo of Doctor Who that anything is possible, and that you can do so many wacky things. I mean, heck, the third season had the frickin' Macra come back, and the Macra Terror was an episode that was lost to the sands of time until they were able to reconstruct it with animation. So you know what? There is a chance that they can do something with this story, and I hope they do. I hope that it comes back to their head like going, man, wouldn't it be great if we did something with this? And maybe try to take it on a step further, because the scale of what they're doing with Doctor Who nowadays, as far as like how big the productions are, I think they could do some incredible things. And I urge Doctor Who fans, first off, go watch this episode. It's an absolute blast, and I feel really does show off the full extent of what Doctor Who is capable of. And then after you watch it, and in my opinion, inevitably enjoy it, I'd say go hit the internet and go say, do it! And also, for a lot of people jumping into the classic series and wanting to see some of the earlier stuff, it's also a great one to start with Patrick Troughton. Especially this one, because he is a much more whimsical Doctor. He's much more mischievous, and he does like to wear his clownishness on his sleeve. And when it comes to his Doctor, this is the right kind of episode where the Doctor and the story fit perfectly. So do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think that this episode is a testament to the boundless imagination of Doctor Who? Or do you think that there may be some other examples that do a much better job showing what you could do with this entire franchise? Leave it all in the comments below. And for more addictive content and narcotic casseroles, simply like, share, subscribe, click. Thou shalt be served.